You're working on a piece you love, but you come across a problem. Some sections feel very awkward for your fingers. They either feel uncomfortable or they just don't seem to flow well to the next bunch of notes. In this video, I want to share with you 5 pro tips for piano fingering so you'll know exactly what fingers to use for your parts. A disclaimer that these are guidelines. Without seeing your specific part, I can't diagnose and tell you the exact fingerings you need to use, but I do hope that these 5 pro tips do give you some level of solutions to your problems. Before I give you the 5 pro tips, I want to give you first my 3 principles for piano fingerings. Every time I decide what fingers to use, my decision has to pass these 3 principles, these 3 tests. Principle number 1 is I will select a fingering that allows me to play legato without the pedal. This means to join notes without the pedal. The idea behind this is that we want to make the melodic line very smooth and very, very musical. We don't want to have disjointed parts such as this. This doesn't sound as musical as. To do a thumb tuck that extends our range and then we can join more notes together. Principle number 2 is to choose a fingering that results in a good hand position to play whatever notes are next. In this first section, the starting right hand notes are. Now this is very, very uncomfortable. Okay, so not only do I have to join it, the fingerings 1, 2, 3, 4 doesn't leave me in a good position to play the next high A. So instead, I will want to do a thumb tuck. So thumb tuck to C that allows this A to be executed very, very smoothly. So choose a fingering that allows your hand to be in a good position to play anything that comes next. Over time of playing piano, you'll start to develop this sixth sense. It's like every single measure you're thinking about, okay, what's next? How can I play these notes so that the next measure is easy? And when you're playing then this measure, you're also already thinking about the next measure. So you're always thinking ahead, always planning ahead so that every single section feels comfortable and plays very securely. Principle number 3 is to never be in an uncomfortable or painful position. So for example, you will never ever play something, let's say in for release, this part with 1, 5, 1, 5, 1. This is very awkward, it's very uncomfortable. I will probably try to not play with those fingers. Let's talk about some practical tips for piano fingering. So I have 5 for you today. Piano fingering tip number 1, as we alluded to before, is to use our thumb tuck to extend our range, to never run out of fingers. So let's say the starting notes are. We don't want to play like this. To have that disjoint between the C and the A, we want to do a thumb tuck so that we can join it. So in your specific piano part, I want you to look at the notes, take a step back, look at the 2, 3, or 4 measures of notes, and if you have a specific problem, see if there's a place where you can do a thumb tuck so that you don't run out of fingers. Practical tip number 2 is to learn all the scales and arpeggios fingerings. The reason piano teachers are always talking about practicing scales and practicing arpeggios is because in the songs and pieces we play, scales and arpeggios happen in all of these songs and pieces. So when you do this training of, let's say in G major, this training of understanding, okay, so it's in a set of, let's say 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, 2, 3 again, and 1, 2, 3, 4. So there's 3, 4, 3, 4, and obviously you end with a pinky. And when it comes down, it's the same way again. So 4, 3, 4, 3. When you do this training and you ingrain in your head the scale fingering, so which is most of the time, not for all of them, but most of the time, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, you can apply the fingerings you learn in scales into pieces. So let's say in this part here where we have a G, A, B, so on and so forth. Now, because I've studied the G major scale so much, I'm able to play this. Let's say even if the fingering's not there, let's say those ones are not there, I can tell that it's probably a 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, so on and so forth. It's like studying the scales and arpeggios allow me a guidebook to apply those fingerings when they actually happen in real pieces. It's not my intention in this video to cover all the scales and arpeggios, but just to give you some homework on what to do that will really help you to know what fingers to use in pieces, is you want to learn all the major scales, all the minor scales. You probably want to learn the chromatic scales. You want to learn the arpeggios as well. So let's say the 3-note arpeggios. If we, let's say, do C major. You also want to learn some of the 4-note arpeggios, so which is to kind of play the top C as well. So, and then do it the first inversion. So let's say in this pattern, so I use 1, 2, 3, 5. Next one is 1, 2, 4, 5, and 1, 2, 3, 5, 1, 2, 3, 5. And because I've done this training, when this kind of stuff happens in pieces, I sort of don't have to think much about it, because I know roughly that shape, it's probably best to execute it with 1, 2. You'll develop the sixth sense of what fingers to use, whether it's 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. Tip number 3 is to give larger gaps to 1 and 2, rather than 2, 3, or 3, 4, or 4, 5. This one's a very specific tip, so it really depends on the piece, but I do want you to keep this in mind for each new song or piece that you play, which is that if you look at your hands, if you look at 1 and 2, 1 and 2 splits really, really well. You can play very, very far notes with it, so you can play a 6, depending on your hand span, you can usually either do a 5th or a 6. But 2 and 3, look at this. This doesn't split very much. So you don't want to ever play things like, for example, this is very, very awkward. Okay, to let's say do a 5th with that. Do you see how awkward that is? When I do that, I just feel so much tension throughout my forearm. So never try to split 2 and 3. Never try to split 3 and 4 too much. Never try to split 4 and 5 too much as well. If you really want to join a phrase and there is a part with a larger interval, give that to 1 and 2 or 1 and 3. Practical tip number 4 is to replace fingers. Let's say in my little composition of before. So did you see? For example, let's say I wanted to join this E. I didn't want to let that go. There is actually an opportunity, because this note's really long, whilst it is pressed down, I can switch for any finger I want. Replace. So think about this. Whenever there's a part in your music that is a longer note, potentially you can substitute or replace that finger with something else that allows you to then extend your range to play another note. Practical tip number 5 is a tip for black keys. So if you look at your hands again, if I were to ask you which are your 3 tallest fingers, you'll probably say not 1, probably not 5. It'll probably be 2, 3, and 4. These are the taller fingers. So usually speaking in piano, we want to use 2, 3, or 4 for the black keys. And we want to try to avoid using 1. 5 sometimes we can use the black keys, but 1 in particular, if we can, we want to try to avoid playing the black keys, also because the 1 is so short. I hope these tips provide some help to you. They are tips that avoid tension, they are tips that allow you to not run out of fingers, and they are tips that, in my opinion, most importantly, allows you to play legato and join all notes. If you're a piano player and you have other piano fingering tips, please share in the comments below. Ask any piano questions you have as well. 90% of our content comes from your questions. You can watch some of my scales or arpeggios videos here. I'll catch you in the next video.